Don't you just want to go out and live a normal, healthy life?
Those are Grandpa's symptoms. You're too young to be sick like that.
That's not a real diagnosis. I've never heard of it.
It's all in your head. Remember, mind over matter.
Stop pretending. There's nothing wrong with you.
You're one of those?
Really? You need to lay down
Quit
again?
being lazy.
If you eat more and move
You don't
more,
look sick.
you should see my
Yeah,
chiropractor.
but my pain's real.
I wish I had a disease that made me
so
skinny.
You're too young to have
It
all
must be
this
nice
going
not
on.
to work.
There's
There's
nothing
nothing
wrong
wrong
with you.
It's all in your head.
Well, good morning, APU. Thanks for being here this morning. I have a special welcome. We have some guests that are thinking about transferring to APU. So, guests, thank you so much for being here. Thank you. Yes. This is a special place. We hope you choose to join us. So, I want to begin quickly with a scripture for you. We're talking about pain and faith. And so, I want to set the stage with this scripture. It is John 16. So Jesus is sharing with his disciples the things that are to come. And very soon after this, Jesus will be arrested. The disciples will go through some suffering. And so there's a very inspirational verse Jesus puts right in verse 33, right in the middle of this, telling them what's going to happen. And it goes like this. I have told you these things so that in me you may have peace. And peace here is that Greek word that many scholars feel like says the same thing as shalom, that all-encompassing wellness. So I've told you these things so you may have peace. In this world, you will have trouble. Hey, thanks, Jesus. Great promise. I really appreciate that one. But take heart. I have overcome the world. So the question for me becomes, how do we experience peace in the midst of trouble? How do we experience shalom in the midst of suffering? And I apologize today that we're not going to give you a thorough, comprehensive theological dissertation on that subject. We don't have that kind of answer for you. What we do have is some people who are going to share some experiences with you. And I've had the good fortune over the past couple of years to get to know these folks, some better than others, who suffer from chronic pain and invisible illness. And so they have been willing to come and share a little bit of their experience with you. And I know for me, I have learned from them so much about perseverance, persistence, hope, and I hope you do as well. So panel, thank you so much for being here today. We're going to go to our first question. Yeah, thank you. We're very excited to hear your stories. So as the video showed, I think that for many of us, we make assumptions about what pain looks like. We make those assumptions by what we see or what we've experienced ourselves, but in reality, those assumptions don't always match up with what lived experiences, and not everybody looks the same. And so, could you just share your name, what condition or experience that you've had that brought you to stage today, and just reflect for a minute on what pain or suffering means for you, and maybe even what wellness and healing look like. So, Deji, you drew the straw, so you get to go first.
Yeah, I'll start. So, hello, everybody. My name is Deji Olajide. What's up, y'all? So the way I experienced pain started when I was 13 years old. I was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes. So diabetes has, shout out to all my diabetics out there. So basically, diabetes has two different forms, and so type 1 is basically, it's where you're insulin dependent. So I have to inject myself with insulin using a syringe, usually about 3 to 5 times a day, and also pricking myself in my finger to check my blood sugar to see that my blood sugar is continuously monitored. So just basically throughout the day, I'm usually pricking or injecting myself with some type of needle or some type of syringe, anywhere from 10 to 15 times a day. So that's kind of like the physical, I guess, pain. But then there's also like another just psychological, I guess, pain that you experience having to do that. Every time you go out to eat somewhere or have a little snack or just everything, it can become very tedious to have to continuously think through, okay, how much am I eating? What do I have to do? How do I have to monitor? I feel like I experience pain both like a physical kind of way and also just like a psychological draining of just always having to be on top of myself to make sure that I'm healthy and whole. Yeah.
Hi, my name is Heather, and I live with fibromyalgia, which is a widespread pain condition, and and I have interstitial cystitis, which is an autoimmune bladder disease. And because of those things, I've struggled deeply with depression and anxiety. And when I hear the word healing, I tend to have like a lot of negative feelings towards that word. And I think growing up, I was prayed for a lot of times for healing. And it's not that praying for healing is bad. It's just the assumption that physical healing is what I wanted prayer for. I think that kind of has caused me to have a lot of negative feelings about that word. Sometimes people also insinuate that it's a lack of faith that is like why you're not being healed, and this like especially applies to depression and mental illness. But like those things are real, and the experience is real. And when the focus is all on healing, it really discredits like all of the amazing things that have come out of suffering. I tend to actually have like better feelings towards the word suffering than I do the word healing. Because through suffering, like God has taught me so much, and it's only because I'm feeling good today that I can really say like, oh, I'm thankful for suffering, because there's a lot of days that I can't say that. But because I've experienced like such great despair, I also have the opportunity to experience really great amounts of joy. Yeah.
My name is Brian. I have Crohn's disease, and I have an ileostomy, which is really inconvenient. It's I have a bag on my side, so I don't have to go use. I don't go number 2 basically. I go number 2 in this bag that I just empty out, which is pretty convenient for public bathrooms. Pain has been a part of my life for about 3 or 4 years now, and I have my fair share of ups and downs. Like sometimes I'd be feeling great, the next day I'd be having pain that's tolerable that I just have to suck up, and then other times I just can't get out of bed just because of the pain. But I think my physical illness is not only in the physical, of course, it's in the mental and in the spiritual. Some days I have pockets of depression. I have times of self-doubt and self-pity, which is not the best. But and there's also a spiritual effect in me that I question, like, why did God let this happen to me? What is God's plan in this? Or where is God right now in my time of pain? But don't get me wrong, I believe in the restorative power in the name of Jesus, and I just think that even if I'm not being healed physically right now, God is still restoring me in other aspects of my life, whether it be spiritual relationship with Him or with others, and I think God is healing me through those different ways, if not my physical body. Yeah.
Hi, I'm Kaylin, and I also have, thank you, I also have Crohn's disease. And basically what Crohn's disease is it's an autoimmune gastrointestinal disease that enzymes eat away at my intestines instead of helping things move along. So that causes a lot of pain and fatigue and a lot of other things. But when I think about suffering, it seems to have a very negative connotation, and for the right reasons. But when I reflect on my last 15-ish years of having Crohn's disease, suffering has brought me some of the greatest joy. And if it weren't for suffering with an illness, I would not have met a lot of people that I know now, and I wouldn't be a part of as many communities as I am a part of now. And through being a part of those communities, I have learned the joy, like this pure form of joy that God wants us to know about. And for that, I'm very thankful. And of course, there are days when it's really, really hard and it's hard to get out of bed, but I'm always reminded of God's goodness showing up in suffering. And through my own like emotional healing, and I've learned a lot about myself, and learned that emotional healing through me can also heal other people from hearing these stories and bring reconciliation back to people and within myself.
My name is Haley. Thank you, roommates, and other people. I have endometriosis, which is a reproductive disease or disorder, condition, whatever word you want to call it. And it's basically like this abnormal growth of tissue that occurs like on my reproductive organs. My condition has spread to different parts of my body, like my diaphragm and the outside of my abdominal wall. And I also have interstitial cystitis, which, like Heather says, is an autoimmune bladder disease. And I have had 2 surgeries to address my endometriosis. So I'm going to answer your question in regards to the healing aspect. I think people have kind of put healing into this box and think that healing only means my physical healing and that I won't have an illness anymore. And I believe firmly that the Lord can do that. But I also believe that the Lord has used my illness to heal other parts of my life. And by that, I mean, I used to be a perfectionist. I performed to be loved. I literally was busy 24/7, and I was like the best Christian that I thought I could be. And when I got sick, I was really frustrated. I was like, I can't perform anymore. I can't, like, no one's gonna love me. And the Lord just spoke to me and was like, that's not what it's about. And like, I'm going to use you in a way that you didn't expect. And now I have freedom from not trying to be a perfectionist and not trying to earn love from the Lord or from other people. And so I think and also knowing that healing for me could also mean that my story can provide healing and freedom for someone else that is rooted in the Lord. So I think that it's just important to redefine what healing means, and that God is not limited to the way that he can heal us and that he can heal you. So.
So in our conversation prior to coming here today, we shared a lot about how this impacts our understanding of ourselves and our understanding of God. And I think some of you touched on that a little bit. I want to give you an opportunity, though, if you haven't, to talk a little bit about that. How has your pain, your experience, your condition impacted your understanding of yourself, your own identity, and your understanding of God?
Yeah, so I think for me, growing up, the big no-no as a man, I guess, and as an athlete was to never show pain or weakness. I can even remember, like, playing football or whatever, like, if you were hurt, that was like, oh, you don't want to play, like, you're being a chicken, or you're wussing out or whatever. And I think for me, my idea of myself as I've grown, it's actually funny because a few years ago, Pastor Woody right here, he was in chapel, and he shared about him having type 1 diabetes. And I feel like for me, that gave me something to hold on to understand how I can view myself not only as somebody who suffers like alone, but somebody who also has other people who can like suffer with, you know what I'm saying, with you. So that has kind of helped me understand myself as, okay, I'm not alone in this world, or I'm not the only one to hide it, or I can share with others, and I can know I have other people to rely on, to support. And then my views of God early on, I think when I was first diagnosed, I had a lot of questions of why me, why is God causing this, you know, and extremely frustrated with God. And I think as I've grown older, I've began to see how not only is this just something that's happening to me, but something that God is suffering with me as well. So kind of just that understanding of that I'm not alone, both with people around me and with God, knowing that like God is suffering in this pain with me. So that encourages me. And that kind of helps my understanding of myself and my understanding of God.
Thank you. Yeah.
For me, I think I've also struggled with many, many questions of just being like, why God? Why me? Why this? And realizing that this is something that God is allowing, and if He's allowing it, like He's allowing it for a reason. And so I also have always just kind of had my identity in the things that I've done, and God has really used this as something to slow me down, to not just recognize my own weakness, but to rejoice in that, because in those ways are in the ways that I really need God. And the phrase give us this day our daily bread is something that's totally different. When you wake up and you actually can't do today without God. And so it's taught me just so much more about looking to God, and about not being able to do anything without Him.
For me, I've latched on to this Bible verse, this verse from Romans about suffering producing, perseverance, and then character hope. And it kind of shows me how even there, God works through even something as bad as suffering. I don't let my illness or my suffering or my pain define my character. It's kind of like the illness kind of helped shape me to be who I am today. I wouldn't be who I am or how I am if this didn't happen to me, in a sense. And I'm still waiting for healing. I'm still praying for healing. I still have faith for it. I believe it'll come someday, one way or the other. But either way, I know that God does have a purpose for this. God is in control. And I'm just prepared that whatever that may come, I'll just trust God with everything that I have, because that's all I can really do. I just thank God. Weirdly, I thank God for my illness, because I've grown in relationship with Him, and especially with my friends, and even with others in the Crohn's community. They're so helpful, and they're so it's tight knit, and it's nice to know that there's someone out there who feels the same pain, who's going through the same things, and they're doing all right. So you'd be all right too.
So I was diagnosed with Crohn's disease when I was 7 years old. So I was just about to go into second grade. And at that point in time, my illness was the biggest thing about me, according to myself. And it seemed to be the most important thing about me. And I think what I've learned over living with an illness for a while is that God didn't create me to just be ill, but He created me to be funny and kind and passionate and a good friend. And I think it's unfortunate that it took me so long to understand that about God and about myself. And I think something I've also learned is when I allow myself to be weak, that really shows a lot of strength. And for our club Strong here on campus, our verse for our club is 2 Corinthians 12:10. And basically what that says is, for when I am weak, then I am strong. And that has really been something that God has been instilling in me a lot in the past few years, of when I feel weak and when I humble myself to realize that I cannot do anything without God, literally cannot even get out of bed some days, that when I admit that and ask for help from Him and from my community of roommates and friends, or professors and peers, anyone, that is what makes me feel strong, that I'm able to do that. And so I have learned that God has made me to be a lot more than what just my illness says about me.
So I think that one thing that I've learned about the Lord and about myself is that my illness doesn't hinder my mission field, it expands it. And what I mean by that is I was really frustrated when I got diagnosed a year and a half ago, and I had to miss the last 3 weeks of school at APU. It was so hard, and it was so frustrating, and I was about to go into an internship in ministry at my church. And I was like, there's no way I can keep up with junior high and high schoolers. I can't keep up with them as a healthy person, like, let alone, like, with an illness. And I was like, God, like, why are you taking away this passion from me? Like, why are you hindering me? And I just kind of had this moment with the Lord of, like, he's like, I'm not, like, I want to use you, and I want to use this. And this past summer, I was a camp counselor, and I didn't even apply for that job because I didn't think I could do it, and the Lord let me have it. He's like, no, you can, and it's going to look a lot different than you thought it would. And it was cool because instead of hiking in the front and, like, being crazy with these students, I was able to stay in the back and talk to the students that were a little bit slower. And I was able, instead of the people that couldn't participate because they were either physically injured or, like, internally, like, suffering like I am, I was able to sit on the sidelines and talk to them about the Lord and whatnot. And I was able to relate to one of the students there that had a similar issue reproductively that I did. And so it's just, and also, like, it's a prime example of we're all up on this panel, and if God didn't allow us to have these illnesses, we couldn't use our stories to bring him glory. And I think it's important, too, to know that the Lord wants to use your suffering, and I have to wake up every day and choose to let him, because it's hard, and it's hard to sit up here, and it's hard to be vulnerable, and it's hard to be like, God, I love you, and I don't understand, but I'm going to keep fighting. But God will use it. You just have to let him. So.
I'll be honest, it takes a lot of courage to be up here and to share what's very vulnerable for you. But in talking with each of you, you were very purposeful in wanting to do this because you wanted your community to know something about you, about your story. In the last few minutes we have, what's the takeaway? What would be the one thing, if you could share with us today, that you would want us to know or understand or be encouraged by? Is there a takeaway that you would want us to have?
Yeah, I think a takeaway would be in regards to, there's sometimes jokes that are thrown out around with diabetes, like, say you have, like, a super sugary drink, somebody be like, man, this is like diabetes in a cup. Like, and it's like, you know, it's funny because very often, you know, with type 1 diabetics, it's not like because you consume too much sugar that you've been given, there's, like, really no definition or explanation for why it's been given. So just realizing that certain things like that can get, like, annoying. But I understand, you know, trying to humor. And then, too, I think realizing that some things really just can't be explained. You know, like, I think for me going on, for anyone who might be struggling with pain or experienced it, the question is always why and trying to solve it and figure it out. And the reality is a lot of things can't just be explained with logic. So it's kind of like just trying to remain faithful. So it's okay to not be able to understand or know why. You know, you don't have to wrestle in that.
Yeah. Yeah, and on being careful with your words, it's so easy. We throw around things so easily, like the weather's so bipolar today, or I'm being so OCD about this project, or I feel depressed because I got a B on my test. Just, like, being really careful about some of those things, because those are, like, real medical conditions that people struggle with. And also, just one of the things I think that a lot of people say when they first find out about what I have is, I'm so sorry. And the funny thing is, like, don't be sorry. I'm not sorry. I wouldn't change it. I really wouldn't. Like, we're not looking for pity. It's just, we're just like everyone else. Like, we just need people on our team who can be like, you're strong and you're awesome, and here's a couple extra claps for getting out of bed today.
You know how sometimes when you want to go pray for someone, or you go like on a missionary trip, and then a missions trip, and you're gonna go see poor people and people who are sick and all that, and you go there with the conception or with the idea that I feel bad for them, or I feel pity for them. And you go there with the intention of blessing them, but when you get there, you realize that they are more hopeful, they're more grateful, and more uplifting. And in that moment, you realize, or personally, you feel more blessed than you bringing the blessing to them. Does that make sense? Like I would go to my grandma, and she's like really sick, and I would go and try to care for her and all that, but she knows the Lord, and she's strong. And when I go try to pray for her, she ends up praying for me. So it's kind of like that with specifically for me. Don't pity me personally, because I think this is somewhat of a gift where I can express my love for God and my love for self, and just an opportunity for me to be a blessing to people who are suffering in the same way. Yeah.
I think what is really important to keep in mind is that there is only 5 of us up on this stage, and you're hearing 5 stories and seeing 5 different faces, but there are so many more people in this room and on this campus and in your communities that have a similar story of chronic pain or invisible illnesses. And I would just encourage you guys to really, really keep that in mind as you go about your day-to-day life. I just think as people, and especially as Christ followers, it is so important to just be aware of what your brothers and sisters may be going through. And in your class after this, maybe the person sitting next to you is living with an invisible illness, or someone that you work with, or a professor even, or your future spouse. It's just so important to have this in your toolbox of just being a human, of being aware of what people are going through. And by just being aware, we help them give credibility to their story and help support them in the way that Jesus would want us to support people who sometimes feel like they have nobody else. And you have all the power and to be that person for them, to support them and remind them that they are strong and important, and you are on their team.
I think the kind of like some of what the last thing I wanted to say was like just because you can't see it doesn't mean it doesn't exist. And I did research for my major on invisible illness and the disclosure process of that. And one of the major themes that was in that research is we interviewed people that didn't have an illness but knew someone very close to them that did. And the common theme that we heard was that there was a point in time where the illness was no longer invisible, it was visible, it manifested itself. And then they were able to have a deeper understanding of it, and they were able to validate their pain more. And I think just something I want to challenge all of you, including myself too, is that I don't need to see someone's scars on their wrist to validate their depression. I don't need to see someone in a panic attack to know that their anxiety disorder is real. I don't need someone to see me throwing up because I'm in so much pain to know that my illness is as bad as I say it is. And you know, there's so much evidence that pain is real, like through our words and through the stories. Like, you don't have to see it, and if you get to see it, it's a really vulnerable side of all of us. I know all of us would agree with the people that have seen it. It's vulnerable, and we have to trust those people. And also, there's enough evidence for pain, and it's the same thing with God. There's enough evidence that God is real, and you don't have to physically see him, but he's all around us. And I think it's just so important to keep that in mind, that to walk by faith and not by sight in all aspects of our life. And I think to go off the whole pity thing, I'm sure a lot of us would agree, but speaking for myself, that I would not want my illness to be taken away from me if it meant that I wouldn't be as close to God as I am now, because I have learned to rely on the Lord so much, and even just finishing school has been so hard, but I'm so much closer to the Lord, and I wouldn't be this close if I didn't go through what I went through. So just know that we thank God for it, and don't pity us, but ask questions, and I'm super open. And I know all of us would, if you see us on campus, we would love to talk more, and it's not awkward. So yeah.
Would you join me in thanking our panel? Thank you so much. Yes. Absolutely. Thank you for sharing yourselves with us. We recognize that these might not be the only 5 people who experience this, so we want to put up a slide for you. We have resources on campus. If you feel like you need support with a condition that isn't evident, that people don't see, please know those resources are available for you too. Our students will be up front if you want to come by and say hi and talk with them. We also have our Strong Club has a booth on the plaza right now, a table, so stop by and say hello. May the Lord bless you, keep you, make his face shine upon you, and give you shalom. Have a good day.
I have Crohn's disease, anxiety, depression, and chronic migraines, chronic daily headache, and food allergies,
and upper motor neuron disease.
I have bipolar disorder and anxiety,
depression and traumatic brain injury,
fibromyalgia, interstitial cystitis, depression and anxiety,
Hashimoto's,
endometriosis and interstitial cystitis,
fibromyalgia, suspected lupus, OCD, and anxiety.
I am brave. I am enough.
I am resilient.
I am faithful.
I am beloved.
And together,
we are strong.
Hold me up into the light and study every part of me. I'm an open book. No, I don't